good morning, good evening, whenever you're taking a gander at the video. Like I stated in the first introductory video, I wanted to go over volume, shape, and why we do what we do when we draw. And I thought one of the best ways would be to take a look at what intimidates a lot of people, circles, and particularly bottles. And I want to start off with something this complex because it's just that easy. It's just that simple. And so a little bit of a preface before I go into, I have a little bit of a basic gist of a drawing. You can maybe make it out. Just to explain the premise. Again, with the emphasis on the why. As in why we're doing this, why we break down something like a bottle. Not gonna show you what. I suppose probably shall say what type it is. But anyway, vodka. why we're looking at a bottle in a certain way as a means of drawing, breaking it down into shapes and planes. Because all the bottle is light hitting planes and reflecting, and that's what we're seeing. And the biggest mistake that many people, when they first start out drawing, no matter the age, doesn't matter what age you are, and even into when you're advancing in drawing, you always, when you're seeing it with your eyes, when you're seeing this three-dimensional shape, when you're seeing this, you don't actually notice the depth because your eyes are flattening it out. When you process it, when you're putting it here, you are taking a three-dimensional object. You're processing it as something three-dimensional, but your brain is compacting it. It's already compacting it into something two-dimensional, into something flat. So by the time it gets here, onto the paper, you really want to flatten it out. You don't want to see the depth, and your brain has a hard time processing the depth of the bottle. Right? We see it like this, but really it's this long, and all the variances in between. It takes a while to be able to see that correctly, let alone to put it on the paper, which is something that we're going to go over real briefly. Just watching one video isn't going to take care of it, but I'm going to be as concise as I can, be as blunt as I can, honest as I can, because that's really what this is about. First moment of truth, it's going to take you about 100 times to do something correctly. If there was anything I learned from learning how to be a potter and drawing pottery to begin with, to get the designs, you have to do it 100 times at least before you're good. But if you start out with the knowledge beforehand and the realization of what's going to happen, it's going to make it a lot easier. So when we're drawing a bottle, let's just say we're gonna hold it like this. We're looking at it kind of like this, right? We're gonna take a look. We know there's depth here. We know we have to find a way to trick, and this is deception. We have to deceive our viewer into believing that something that is flat, it's this thick, we have to convey a sense of depth. And in the most basic sense, what I try to do is when I'm looking at something like a bottle, I have to picture it in planes and larger shapes. And so we're going to see the shape right here, right? We're going to see that circle. And how we portray that first circle, that second circle right here, we need to create that cylinder shape to begin with. Don't worry about the patterns. Don't worry about the details or the gloss, the sheen, the reflection of light yet. It's all about establishing that base. The first few lines you put on the paper are actually the most important, which is why it usually takes a lot for a drawing to get going. I'm not going for color. Correct color, I'm just going to use pine green, regular colored pencil. And before anyone goes into why are you using colored pencils as opposed to not, regular pencils. This isn't about shading, this isn't about tone, this is about getting basic shapes. And so when I need to whip out the big boys, I will. But until then, why am I going to do a crop duster's job with a jet, an airliner jet? I wouldn't. I wouldn't expect you to either. So when we're looking at setting up, actually drawing the bottle, we're gonna want to set up the original cylinder. And again, you may be the best artist in the world. You may love contour. You may be, oh, I'm going to get this angle right the first time I know what I see. And the first thing about learning how to draw and being an artist is understanding that you don't see shit. You don't see the truth. Not even once. You don't see what's really going on. We all don't see what's really going on. We're interpreting and misinterpreting all the time what we're seeing. And so when we're drawing, we want to get rid of the bias. We want to be able to set up, and my trick for cylinders is this: treat them like they're squares. When I'm setting up, and I'll do this with darker lines, for example, but this isn't how I usually do it. When I'm setting up cylinders and I'm trying to look at a bottle, I set up cylinders like this, and I will basically take them into quadrants, and I will connect the quadrants like this so that I know what's going on and in what direction. I will always do that. Now these lines are very thick in this instance because this is an example. And then from there, I'm going to go ahead and start playing around. I know I haven't, when we're looking at doing still lifes, again, we have to go with what we see, but do we see the truth? And the answer is no. That's what photos are for. That's why it's very hard to be a good photographer. Kudos to those that are. Because photography flattens everything. So if we're looking at establishing form, right, we're looking at making sure, once we have a base shape, we want to go into establishing some darks right away. I typically work with line, but with glass it's a little bit harder. You really need to start blocking out shapes as opposed to lines. That's really what it's about. And it's very weird because it's at a different angle when I'm looking at the video and watching myself. I'm like, oh no, why is it coming that way? We know there's another, we can see the edge of the bottle, and many times what'll end up happening, and it's happening here too, because my life as a whole is just gigantic series of mistakes. But what I'm seeing here is I'm actually drawing this bottle out as I draw. I'm drawing it, I'm making it longer than it needs to be. Always be willing to admit that you're seeing something incorrectly, or drawing it incorrectly. I think a lot of ego creates a lot of mistakes. But for what we're working on now, we have the idea, we have the general sketch, now we're going to go in and start blocking out space and trying to catch the light. And I always suggest, don't hold the item you're drawing. In this instance, I want you to see the shape and get an idea for perspective and where I'm coming from with it, usually in terms of still life, and I'll show you how to set one up in a different video. You're looking at very set lighting, viewfinders. I'll show you how beneficial those are. But again, for this purpose, we're looking at base shapes and why they're there. And after we establish base shapes, we establish base shadows. You really want to define your dark areas first. So in this instance, and I always start out super duper light. Don't be afraid to make the brush strokes or actual pen strokes match the direction of what you're doing. And I know I have a label coming across here, so I'm going to go and get a little fancy. And don't be afraid to set up guidelines for yourself. And by guidelines, I mean these lines right here to make sure you're going in the right direction. And one thing you will find out about cylinders, especially with older bottles, is that especially even if they're handmade, they're going to have these flaws, especially if they're handmade. So while I'm establishing my darks here, I'm going to go ahead and do that. While I'm establishing my shadows, I also want to go ahead and realize what I'm going to do with my lights. I do have... And I always very, very, very lightly outline my lights. I know you're not necessarily supposed to. You're supposed to define them with shadow. I like setting up guides to where I know my lights are going to be. And I'm a control freak like that. And that's okay. Everyone's got a slightly different style. So, coming back in, I know I'm holding it in my hand, and I'm going to neglect my hand for the time being. Artistic liberty, right? And I'm going to go back in here and start working that way. And I know I have light, and another light coming out here, because I have the light above me. And so it really is, after you've set up those base shapes, a game of give and take with your lights and your darks. And don't necessarily rely on line or establishing lines until the end. You really want to take shadows. Shadows first. Shadows are always first, followed by your lights. It really does help in terms of getting an idea of where the shape ends and where it begins. And for those of us who are very line heavy, such as myself, we really want to. And I'm getting invested now, so you're gonna see my back for a little bit. We're gonna try and fix this right here, because I really need it. I need this to be okay, because I'm setting an example for everyone else. It's like when you're jogging and you're taking your fat friend jogging for the first time, and you really, really, really try to outdo yourself because, you know, you don't want to be the fat guy. You want to be like, I've been jogging for years, everyone, I'm so in shape, look at my skinny legs. And it never really works out that way. You may or may not have given yourself an asthma attack, and this may or may not be an anecdote, but still. When dealing with establishing things, you really want to go and try and get that, and you can see it, this is elongating it more than really just kind of drawing it out. I can see it, especially in the camera. Maybe I should just do this more often, and then I can see how totally flawed I am as someone who draws. Or have that happen. Either way, when once you get things established, that's really how easy it becomes. And never forget that there's an inside to the shape that you're drawing. There's an inside to the bottle, right? Even though we can't see it, we have to take into consideration what the inside is, which is why, again, I always suggest drawing guides on the inside ever so lightly, not as heavy as I've drawn them here. You can see, because I'm drawing the... you bugger. Because I'm drawing the bottle out, if this was actually a little bit more tucked up here, like it should be, in a perfect world with perfect circles, you would see that this would actually crimp, and it's looking very flat, so I need to put a little bit more emphasis on the top. And we need to have this come out here, because really this is closer to us if we're looking at it at an angle, and we can get things fixed that way. However, base structure, right? Don't forget what you're drawing has volume. End of story. Always be considerate. Look at what you're drawing from multiple angles. Even if it's a still life, even if you're only drawing it from one perspective, look at it multiple ways. Get a feeling for it. If you can touch it, get an idea for the texture and how you want to get that onto the paper. Again, more advice. Always more advice. But it's just advice until you put it into practice. So get out there, draw something, mess up on something 100 times, and Then get back to me. We'll draw some stuff. It'll be great. Thank you.